So the short king of the north is back, Jon Snow, and he's not allying or fighting with wildlings in this one. He has become the wildling. So it's been quite a while since I've seen a werewolf movie, especially in movie theaters. So I heard Kit Harington was going to be in this, saw the teaser. I was intrigued at least. And regardless of what I say going forward, I don't think The Beast Within is a poorly made movie. Quite the contrary, actually. I think it's a very competently made movie. It's got some really good visuals. It's got some good sound design. The acting is pretty good for what they're written to do. It's got some really cool scenery as well. Like it's in the countryside. It takes place in Europe somewhere. I'm not particularly sure, but you can just tell by the way they drive cars and just the scenery. You just get some good drone shots of the forest, of the countryside. I thought it looked really cool. And what this film is actually about is it follows this family of three. You have this father, a daughter, and a mother. They're just living on this farmland in the countryside in Europe somewhere. And it's just exploring the dynamics and the ripple in the family because of the fact that Kit Harington plays a dad who's a werewolf. You're dealing with that. You're dealing with how they deal with his transformations, the abuse that comes with it, as we'll get into in a sec. But that's what it's attacking on the surface, but it's really kind of not the general core of what this movie's aiming to get at. Because this film really does feel like it's trying to be The Witch when it comes to werewolf movies, and without spoiling too much of where it goes, if you've seen The Witch, you can probably pick up on what I'm putting off when it comes to where this movie ends up going. Because it really is kind of up its own ass. It's one of those elevated horror movies where what you're getting on the visual surface is not really the core central theme they're trying to explore in the movie, as we'll get into in just a sec. When you get past the werewolf stuff on the surface, this movie really is just aiming to have commentary on abusive relationships from parents and towards their spouses, and it's done pretty thick. So if you're going into this hoping for a fun little werewolf movie with Jon Snow in it, be warned, this is really not that movie at all. It's made pretty clear early and often that the dad in this family is pretty abusive, and the daughter's kind of scared of him, trying to learn about his tendencies, why he's gone at night, why the mother acts the way she does towards him. It's really exploring that dynamic of how this is really causing a ripple in the family, how they don't get along anymore. And it's really elevated horror in the most traditional sense, where the werewolf stuff completely comes second to this. I can actually commend this movie for a couple of reasons, because a lot of werewolf movies are pretty generic and they follow a pretty typical trajectory where you have a character, he's a pretty nice guy, loving family man, and the problem is he's a werewolf. So it's balancing in two acts, him being a normal, loving guy, and the fact he can't control his werewolf tendencies, where he changes into a werewolf, causes a bunch of damage, people are after him. That's usually how it's broken up. Where this one's tonally consistent in the fact that the dad is completely abusive throughout, werewolf and non. So I like the fact that in this one, you don't really have a character you can root for when he's not a werewolf. That's one. The second thing being, I actually kind of like the fact that they weren't really tackling the werewolf angle in this. They were really approaching it from a family dynamic of what it would actually be like and all of the turmoil that would be caused if you did know someone who was like a werewolf or transformed or abusive. Because obviously in these films, a lot of the time, you just see it from the perspective of a guy who becomes an animal. But in this one, you really feel the everyday effects of the separation of them disappearing for days at a time at night to get separated. The fact that he kind of blends reality with being a werewolf all the time into his personality. It's just a different way to approach the subject. I feel like not a lot of werewolf movies come to mind, so I appreciate it. But that being said, as I'll get into a sec, it is not without faults at all. And finishing up with the positives I actually liked about this thing, I thought the acting in this was all pretty competent and good. I liked Kit Harington as the werewolf. He just looks like a guy who would transform into a werewolf, and he wears a fur coat better than anyone, as we learned in Game of Thrones. But obviously, he's asked to be this abuser, and I think it's very smart, and he's good at being subtle in how he does that, in which the most minor lines will set him off. He'll get to be abusive, where he just doesn't know where the line is when it comes to interacting with people, playing with his daughter, talking to his wife, where they'll say something or he'll act in a certain way where it's very obvious he's went over the line and it's kind of getting abusive. But I just think the way they kind of displayed that could have been more hammed up than it was, so I appreciated the subtlety of his character. Thought he did a good job. But he's not really even the star of this movie. His daughter's actually the lead you spend the vast majority of the time with, and I think she's pretty good in this, especially for a child actress. I really liked her in stop motion earlier this year. She's good at showing fear in this new movie. She was creepy in that one. I think she has a bright future ahead of her, so I think she was one of the standouts in this. But getting back into all the ways this movie is clearly talking about abuse and it's not really a werewolf movie, there's a conversation where Jon Snow, I'm just going to call him Jon Snow from now on, by the way, a lot easier. He's constantly having these very strange monologues with the wife and the daughter where he always goes a step too far, where he just makes it very unsettling. He wants to assert power almost. And he'll play these games where he'll be keeping a toy away from the daughter.
Kneel before your king.
And I think they made him give these speeches and act that way to illustrate that his behavior is kind of blended together when it comes to being the beast in him, because that is just part of his personality. There's a scene between him, the dad, and the daughter where he's explaining to her that he never met his grandparents, but he did know his dad, and his dad had the same thing he did. He'd turn into a beast, he'd hurt his wife. So he needed to separate himself because he knew the type of person he was. And it's just the most clear analogy ever for abuse. The way an abuser will pass it down, then the cycle continues. They reciprocate it onto their kids. Obviously, the most clear metaphor ever they're going for. You know, it goes a step farther where a werewolf changes once a month. He has this transformation into a beast. He lashes out, causes damage, kills. The same way an abuser can. You can hide it subtly for a while. Maybe once in a blue moon, you know, you lash out, you might do damage, maybe even kill someone you care about, because that's what abusers do. The whole concept of the beast within is so clearly the fact that, you know, he's a werewolf deep down, but you also can't run from who you truly are. If you're an abuser, you have those tendencies in you. They'll come out eventually and you will show your true colors. This is also by definition a slow burn, as people like to throw that term around. And I'm very careful when I do use that term because I think it kind of operates on a spectrum where on one half you have an effective slow burn that just kind of has mounting tension and dread, and it just keeps building and it keeps going until the pot finally boils over. And then on the other side of the spectrum, it's just watching paint dry. And I think this movie's kind of closer to the latter because this movie fails to do what a lot of modern horror movies do. That's why I'm so sick of the term elevated horror, because it's trying to talk about this very serious subject matter clearly, and it's kind of metaphorical, but it fails to establish anything traditional. Like, there's no tension to it, there's no scares to it, there's no stakes to it. So it really just plays out like a very hammed up, overly visual metaphor. You're just watching a visual metaphor play out before your eyes. So, you know, I understand what they're doing, but how you get to the end result of it is just not all that interesting. When you do get to the ending, I thought it was fine. I mean, it's obviously going for some heart, and it's obviously trying to conclude the commentary this film is so desperately talking about. Didn't really think there was any stakes to it. Didn't find it very tense. I didn't really care about the outcome for the characters, though. But I do respect this film because where a lot of films like this like to stay ambiguous and metaphorical, at least they just directly come out and show you exactly what I've been saying. So it kind of confirms everything I've said, and it doesn't leave the viewer kind of questioning, like, what the fuck was the point of the movie? So I do respect them for that. At least they just come out and say, hey guys, it was a giant metaphor. So overall, I understand where the film's coming from. I understand what they're trying to talk about, but it's kind of pointless at the same time because you knew what they were getting at within 5 minutes or so. So if you like elevated horror films, maybe you haven't seen a werewolf film in a while, you want to see one in the theaters, maybe check this one out if you got nothing else to do. Have you guys seen or heard of The Beast Within? If you have, comment down below, or let me know if you think Jon Snow will ever be involved in a decent movie after Game of Thrones. As always, if you haven't subscribed, what the hell are you waiting for? I do it all on this channel. New releases, scary stuff, tier list. Join me down below. Love to have you. That's all I got in this video. Peace.